I want to paint a picture of irony here. Consider this the Spirit sequel to my USA video, that one where it was depressing and full of despair and desperation and sadness and anger. This one is going to be one that is the complete opposite. It is pure bliss. It is joy. It is, moreover, relief, and it is closure. So, obviously, many of you know that I support both the Egyptian and the U.S. national teams. But there are so many ironic parallels here that it's not even funny. So, to start off with me for a second, the first time in my lifetime that the U.S. will not be at the World Cup. Also, the first time in my lifetime Egypt will be at the World Cup. And if you had asked me beforehand, I would have pegged the U.S. to have gotten there, because as an Egyptian, a lot of my Egyptian subscribers will know what I'm talking about. We're used to it. We're used to it. We're used to Egypt not being in World Cups. We're used to close but no cigar. We're used to not translating success at the African Cup of Nations level into actual World Cup appearances. So this is something that's really special. Really special. And I said it in my last Q&A. Seeing Egypt in a World Cup is one of the 5 things in my life that I want the most. There's happiness, there's security, stability, friends and family count as one, and the 5th one is see Egypt in a World Cup. Deadly serious. And in 3 weeks' time, I will get to see it. And words cannot express, forget me. Words cannot express what that means to millions of people, right? Who, in this day and age, especially after the whole political unrest in 2011, really needs something to look forward to, needs something to smile about. Now, the ironic part of all of this is Egypt, for the last 20-25 years, has been a team that has excelled at the local level. In club football, Al Ahly, 10 African Champions League titles, the most successful club in African history. 4 African Cup of Nations titles, one coming in 1998, the other were 3 in a row between 2006 and 2010. But the most maddening, the most unexplainable, inexplicable thing was, for some reason, we couldn't get back to the World Cup. I don't know if it was a mental block. Maybe it just speaks to how unforgiving African qualification is. But for some reason, we just couldn't get back to the World Cup. And 2018 will be only the 3rd time in history that Egypt will ever be in the World Cup. To put that into context, Ghana and the Ivory Coast qualified for the first time in 2006. By 2014, they had qualified for more World Cups in an 8-year period than Egypt had been to the World Cup in over 80 years. That's nuts. That is nuts. 1934, 1990, 2018. Egypt was the first African country to be at the World Cup, which was only the 2nd World Cup ever in history, back in 1934, 1 year after World War II began. It would be 56 years before Egypt got back in 1990. And if you paid attention to the video that Dominic Rich and I did a couple of weeks ago or so, around there, World Cup Trivia number 2, Egypt is tied in 2nd with Norway as the country in the world that has the longest gap in between World Cup appearances. So we got back in 1990. And then 2018, 28 years later. And the funny thing about that is it is exactly half the amount of time it took us to get back the first time. So it took us 56 years. Now it took us 28 years. And it was always something of an anomaly, of something that was an odd thing standing out, not just in Egyptian football, but in the wider African football scene in general. A lot of people never really understood how could Egypt have so few appearances in the World Cup. Other North African teams like Tunisia, Morocco, they've been there 5 times. Algeria's been there 4 times. Egypt had only been there twice, and one of them was way back in the 30s. So, Egyptian football fans were very much used to it. We were used to this. And the most disappointing failure to qualify was, in my opinion, 2010. Because in 2010, we needed a victory in the last game at home against Algeria. We needed to win by at least 2 goals, at least a 2-0 victory, in order to bring it to a sudden death playoff on neutral territory. And by God, we did it. I remember the last game we played at home in Cairo. I was at my aunt's house watching this. We scored in the first 5 minutes, and then we scored in the 95th minute, which was one of the very last plays of the game to win 2-0. Whole stadium erupted. Optimism was back, and then we went to Sudan, we went to Khartoum, and we lost 1-0 in the sudden death playoff, and we didn't go to the World Cup. And the first ever World Cup held on African soil in South Africa 2010. That first African World Cup did not have the 3-time defending African champions in it. And it was something that was so frustrating, because from 2004, right around when Hassan Shehata started to really rebuild the team and we had our golden generation of players, from 2004 to 2010, we couldn't get back to the World Cup. We just couldn't do it for whatever reason. And get this. This is where the irony comes in. So after winning 3 African Cup of Nations in a row, we don't even qualify for the next 3 African Cup of Nations in a row. Never mind the World Cup, but we didn't qualify for 2012, 2013, nor 2015. So, that was sandwiched in with 2014 World Cup's failure under Bob Bradley, which was a unique disappointment in its own regard, but not as much as 2010 was, in my opinion. So in 2017, we qualify. We actually get back to the African Cup of Nations, a tournament that we're so used to doing very well in after not qualifying 3 in a row. And expectation is low. You know, no one really expects us to go on a run like we did back in the earlier 2000s. We're just happy to be there. So, okay, let's see what we can do. Let's get out of the group. And then we can, have a discussion from there. We rode a clutch defensive performance all the way to the final. Egypt did not concede a single goal until the semifinal last year against Burkina Faso. And this was much to my surprise, because I did not think we were going to do very well in the African Cup of Nations last year. I thought it was just an achievement to get back to it. We got to the final. Can you believe it? And we take a 1-0 lead into halftime against Cameroon. Cameroon comes back in the second half. They win the match 2-1. And in a very rare occasion, this is not, bragging or anything. This is not. It's just trying to paint the scene here for what this was like. Egypt is used to winning African Cup of Nations finals when we get to the final. We almost always win the final when we get to the final. So when we had that come from behind loss to Cameroon, it was a foreign feeling. It was something that we did not have experience in facing. It was something that, I don't want to use the word unexpected because I use that word too many times in this video, but we were so used to winning African Cup of Nations finals when we did get to finals that when we actually lost an African Cup of Nations final, even though we were not primed to get to it prior to the tournament starting, it was a shock in and of itself because, we weren't used to that. It was the same story was always do well in African Cup of Nations, do well, if not outright win it, and then don't qualify for the World Cup. And then 8 or 9 months later, in a qualification group where Mohamed Salah played a heavy hand in almost every single goal that was scored, whether he scored it himself or he assisted it or he was part of that final link-up play in the build-up to the goal, really, by many metrics, putting the team on his back, we somehow qualify for the World Cup. In the same similar dramatic fashion that we failed in 2010 with a stoppage time goal, in this case, a penalty, in the 95th minute to send everyone up in raptures. It's ironic because in 2017, the script for Egypt that we have been so used to reading was flipped entirely on its head. We had lost the African Cup of Nations final, and we had qualified for the World Cup. And it's so funny how football works that way sometimes. It really, really is. I'm reminded of a quote by Sir Alex Ferguson, former Manchester United manager. He said, I believe it was after the 1999 Champions League final where Manchester United came from behind to win. Post-press match conference, all he had to say was, football, bloody hell. And he's exactly right. So Egypt is back at the World Cup for the first time since 1990, the third time ever. And they do it in the most unconventional way possible, with failure in a regional confederation tournament and success in returning back to the global stage. And perhaps the most ironic part of all of this, after everything I just said, is that if you look at it from an objective standpoint, this Egypt team, without Mohamed Salah, this Egypt team, how does it stack up against the other teams that won the treble in the mid to early 2010s? It doesn't hold a candle. That team blows this one we have now out of the park. I thought about this. Man per man, this Egypt team is probably our worst team in about 15 years. But their names are going to go up in light forever, because this is the generation that got us back to the World Cup. And it's funny because this sport, it just works that way sometimes. Cameroon knows our pain now. They didn't qualify for the World Cup. They're the current African champions. Chile, Copa America, 2-time champions. This is probably the best Chilean team ever in South America. They didn't qualify. This is just a funny sport. And this is a sport that can't be explained sometimes. It just can't. And there's something that is sad about that, but also really beautiful at the same time. Really. But just getting back to this tournament, look, if this was that 2010 team, maybe we can have a conversation. You know what? We're good. We're the class in Africa. We should get to the round of 16. This team is different. But you know what? We're just happy to be back. We're just happy to be back. The success, the accomplishment has already been achieved. That's it. Anything that happens now is a bonus. It's a bonus. I'm just happy that I get to see my country in the World Cup again for the first time in my life. That's something I've always wanted to see. And we are so used to heartbreak. Millions of us. And what this team of players did is absolutely incredible. And for somebody like Mohamed Salah, who's having a tremendous breakout season, many people are slotting him as the hottest variety in the world right now, right? The most, in trend guy on the market in world football. For an Egyptian to be considered on the short list for a Ballon d'Or in 2018, where the last 5-6 years has always been won by Ronaldo or Messi, I can't describe to you how good that feels. I can't. So, them finally putting away the demons that have plagued us since 1990, getting back to the World Cup, being finally put to rest by arguably the least esteemed team to do it, that is something. That is something else.